In March of 2023, the global thermostat somehow broke. And we are 5 standard deviations above the mean, and holding for 7 months now. We are in a new reality. In the Caribbean and the Atlantic, in Florida, the temperature got to record levels this year, 2023. Unprecedented. Water temperatures of 101 Fahrenheit in some of the shallows, 38.4 degrees centigrade. And now it's moving towards the Pacific. In Fiji, we've discovered a new way to keep corals alive in the face of mass bleaching. We go to the hottest reefs where corals can survive these hot temperatures, or at least they can survive 34 or 35, or like in the 90s in Fahrenheit, and we move these adapted corals out to cooler water before the bleaching comes. Due to this increased threat, we are now creating the biggest rescue reef in history in Fiji. These letters are over 15 meters high, and it says Ula. Ula means life. Now that we have a strategy to save these corals, we're not just stopping in Fiji with the Ula Reef, we're actually now going out into the region. Right now, a massive heat wave is heading for Tuvalu, and we're in Tuvalu right now working to save the hot pocket corals by moving them out to cooler waters. We're not doing this alone. It's the communities, it's the Kapule, the Tradition Council, and the government of Tuvalu. We are working together in unison to save these hot adapted corals before they die. Now I have a message to the COP28 delegates. You're there for a reason. You have been chosen to be there. I have 6 Pacific Island grandchildren with my blood. And these children are not going to see coral reefs like we have seen them when I grew up fishing and swimming in the sea. We need to come together and develop a strategy to save these peoples, these reefs. And if we can do that, we can save this world.
Good morning. Hope everyone's had a wonderful week. We've got a little bit lighter of a crowd this morning. I hear that the discotheque was hopping last night at 1:30. I imagine it'll fill in a little bit as the morning goes on. I hope everyone has had an amazing week. We could not be happier with all the content that has been presented, an amazing poster session last night that just really brought hundreds of emerging practitioners, emerging students, and established professionals together to share an immense amount of knowledge. One of the things that makes me so happy when I go around to those sessions is to hear how succinct people have gotten with their ability to pitch their content. If you went to a poster session 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been a little bit of a rambling mess, and I went up to multiple people last night and just got a nice, hard, succinct pitch. And that is so important when we're trying to sell our work and communicate our work, that we're in a position to be able to just sell it like that. And the same thing with the 5-minute talks. I know a lot of people don't love the idea of a 5-minute talk, but you've got to be able to communicate your message, and every single one of them that I've seen this week has just been absolutely spectacular. And the workshops that we've had, people put a massive amount of effort in to put these workshops on. For those of you that have had an opportunity to participate in them, I hope you've really gotten a lot out of them. We've got more today, we've got more tomorrow. And the week is still going, right? We've got an amazing round of workshops today. We have an amazing set of concurrent sessions and workshops tomorrow, and an amazing night planned tomorrow night at the closing reception at the Mexican Plaza with some very unique performances coming your way, and I won't say any more than that, but just you won't want to miss it. And speaking of unique performances, Tomorrow evening, after the Mexican Plaza, we'll have some very unique performances with the famous Reef Futures karaoke party taking place at the hotel. And I know, from what I hear, there's been some good practice going on throughout the week so far. So as we start our program this morning, I wanted to take a minute again to thank Iberostar as our host here. We've had an amazing week. I think you guys have had an opportunity to see that they really walk the talk when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to doing the right thing here. Wherever you go throughout the property, it's evident, but not in your face at the same time, and that's exactly how it should be. And that work doesn't just happen naturally. It happens as a result of having an amazing team behind the scenes and having sustainability at its core. Earlier in the week, we had the opportunity to be joined. She couldn't join us here on stage, but joined us here during the week with Gloria Fuchsia, the Vice Chair of Iberostar and their Chief Sustainability Officer, and to know that the second in charge person at Iberostar's title is Chief Sustainability Officer, I think says it all. And so we couldn't have been happier to have Gloria with us earlier this week. She couldn't have been happier with everything that's been happening here. But on the ground here at this property, there's a dedicated team that makes sustainability happen. And so I'm very pleased to have Patricia Juarez join us here today to talk a little bit about some of those sustainability efforts. And explain to you a little bit of what happens within their sustainability practice. Patricia is going to give her talk in Spanish, but the slides will be in English, so please follow along and enjoy. Patricia?
Hola. Okay. Buenos días a todos. A nombre de Iberostar les damos la bienvenida a este cuarto día en el Reef Futures 2024. Reiteramos nuestro agradecimiento por elegirnos como sede de su maravilloso evento. Para mí es un placer estar aquí. Agradezco la oportunidad de formar parte de este gran proyecto. Yo soy Project Manager de Sostenibilidad Operativa y me enorgullece mucho el día de hoy compartirles las implementaciones que ha hecho Iberostar en sus operaciones diarias aquí en los hoteles, para que nuestros hoteles vayan dirigidos más a un turismo sostenible y responsable. Al percatarnos que el destino de los plásticos y microplásticos terminaba la mayoría en el mar, y esto repercutía en el daño a esos ecosistemas, desde el 2018 empezamos reemplazando todo lo que era el plástico de un solo uso en nuestras operaciones por alternativas más reutilizables, reciclables y compostables. Este análisis se realizó en toda la operación y en todos los departamentos del hotel, lo que nos permitió eliminar muchos residuos que no teníamos contemplados, como las bolsas de basura, las minidosis de alimentos y las amenidades en la habitación. Todos estos cambios que hemos realizado, ustedes lo han visto día a día en todas sus habitaciones. Y además, uno de los grandes cambios y uno de los más importantes fue la eliminación del agua embotellada en las habitaciones. Se instalaron fuentes de agua que posiblemente todos ya las utilizaron en algún punto, cerca de sus habitaciones, en bares, en restaurantes y también en las áreas de nuestros colaboradores. Todo este cambio comenzó en 2018 y en 2020 nos permitió llegar a este objetivo con gran éxito. Otro de los objetivos que tenemos en Iberostar es en 2025 enviar 0 residuos a vertedero. Esto lo hacemos a través de reducir, reusar y reciclar. Reducimos la mayoría de los residuos generados por el hotel, reusamos la mayor parte de los materiales que tenemos en operación y intentamos reciclar o promover el flujo de la economía circular. Para esto nosotros tenemos un equipo en Iberostar, es un departamento en sí, es un equipo de personas que, como ustedes, están comprometidas y llenas de pasión por realizar esta actividad. Este departamento se asegura de la correcta separación en toda la operación del hotel, en todos los departamentos, de todos esos residuos que nosotros generamos. También nos permite hacer una base de datos e identificar esas áreas de oportunidad que tenemos, tanto en los gestores que usamos en la operación, como en los insumos materiales que tenemos utilizando. También nos formamos al personal y les platicamos la historia a los huéspedes para que conozcan más sobre las estrategias que tenemos en este departamento. Y sobre todo garantizamos un destino final confiable y correcto para todos los residuos. Desde la implementación de estos equipos, la digitalización en muchas de nuestras áreas de recepción, administración, para hacer en todos nuestros procesos para hacer menos uso de papel, y la implementación de cubos de separación en todas las áreas, que seguramente también los han visto, porque esto es una naturalidad o algo muy natural en nuestros hoteles. Creamos una línea base en 2021 que nos permitió ver cómo íbamos evolucionando o cómo hemos reducido en cuanto al residuo enviado a vertedero. Y me complace decirles que a final de 2023, a nivel Iberostar, a nivel global, tuvimos una reducción de más del 54%. Continuamos trabajando para el cumplimiento de este objetivo, ya que, como les mencionaba, el siguiente año el objetivo es ser 0 residuos enviados a vertedero. Dentro del manejo de todos estos residuos que tenemos está el residuo alimentario o el residuo orgánico. Para ayudarnos con esta disminución, Iberostar implementó inteligencia artificial en las cocinas de los hoteles. Esto nos ayuda a cruzar la información de los residuos con fotografías y pesajes clasificados, y nos da los datos que podemos cruzar con la operación del hotel, para que así podamos tomar estrategias y ajustar la producción de los alimentos que presentamos cuando tenemos más o menos ocupación, más o menos niños, se consume más o menos alimentos. Todo esto nos permite también hacer un mayor aprovechamiento de nuestros recursos y además brindar una mejor calidad al huésped con todas las preferencias que tienen sobre los alimentos que consumen. Desde que implementamos esta herramienta y comparando el mismo periodo del 2022 con el 2023, todas estas estrategias dan frutos y nos complace decir que reducimos más de 900 kilos de residuo orgánico a nivel global por implementar esta inteligencia artificial. También, como todos nuestros objetivos, seguimos trabajando para que esto el siguiente año sea cada vez menor. Dentro de otro de nuestros objetivos también es ser neutros de huella de carbono para 2030. Esto lo queremos lograr reduciendo el 35% el consumo de electricidad. Dentro de nuestra operación diaria, nosotros verificamos y auditamos buenas prácticas energéticas para hacer el uso eficiente de todos nuestros equipos y establecer un mayor aprovechamiento de la energía que consumimos. Buscamos también implementar energía renovable en los hoteles y buscamos electrificar cada vez más las áreas que tenemos de oportunidad, como el implementar robots que nos permitan encender o aprovechar mejor los equipos, y cocinas completas como el que tenemos aquí en Joya de Playa Paraíso, que ya es completamente electrificada. Así eliminamos las emisiones directas que estamos haciendo a el medio ambiente. Dentro de esta reducción del 35%, en 2023, Iberostar logró reducir el 12%, llegando a la mitad más o menos del objetivo, y vamos trabajando para reducirlos cada vez más con estas inversiones, con estas buenas prácticas que hacemos en los hoteles y con la inversión que tenemos. Dentro de las acciones también comprendidas del consumo responsable de pescados y mariscos, buscamos adquirir sobre todo fuentes responsables, que no pesquen especies sobreexplotadas, que respeten los tiempos de veda y que lo hagan de una manera correcta con el arte de pesca, para así no dañar los fondos marinos. Esto es muy importante para respetar también las condiciones tanto de los pescadores como del área natural con la que contamos en las comunidades. Nuestro objetivo para el 2025 es tener el 100% de nuestras fuentes que sean responsables. En México se ha logrado este objetivo, por lo cual pueden comer pescados y mariscos de manera tranquila. Y a nivel global, el objetivo que tenemos ahora cumplido es el 84%. También dentro de todas las implementaciones o cambios que se están haciendo es el de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Esto es que Iberostar invertirá en salud de los ecosistemas a través de distintos proyectos. Uno es el regreening, que ustedes podrán observar en las distintas áreas del hotel. Esto se genera a través de especies nativas. Todos nuestros jardines están cambiando o utilizando especies que sean nativas de aquí, en condiciones climáticas y una forma de una otra forma minimizar el consumo de agua y promover especies polinizadoras. También tenemos manglares. Para nuestros hoteles los manglares no solo representan un embellecimiento de todo lo que es la costa y de todo lo que es la zona de nuestros hoteles, sino también es una guardería de peces en crecimiento. Nos ayuda a hacer hábitat para muchas de distintas especies como cangrejos, tortugas, cocodrilos, y también absorbe pues, los gases contaminantes. Además de que es una barrera de protección tanto como para la zona de estructuras como para nuestros clientes y nuestros colaboradores, aportando más calidad de agua y nutrientes al suelo. Y en cuanto a corales, se tiene distintas acciones o diversas acciones con los corales. Una de ellas es la investigación basada en la ciencia, la cual mis compañeros les han venido explicando a detalle durante estas últimas simposios o foros, y yo les invito a que se acerquen con ellos para cualquier duda. Tenemos un grupo de profesionales que les encanta hablar de los corales con mucha pasión y mucho gusto, porque ellos les responderán todas las dudas que tengan. Tenemos claro en Iberostar que es un reto el que tenemos para el cumplimiento de todos estos objetivos, pero al ver a nuestros colaboradores, al ver a nuestros compañeros, al ver a eventos como este y al ver a nuestros huéspedes que se van con un poquito de las estrategias que se toman, de cómo queremos mudar todo esto a un turismo responsable y cuidar y hacernos responsables también nosotros del cuidado de cada vez que nosotros vamos a este tipo de zonas, pues nos motiva, ¿no? Nos motiva a seguir y que se vayan con un poquito de lo que se hace en la hotelería para hacer este cambio. Los invito ahora sí a cualquier duda o si quieren saber más o tener más claros todas estas iniciativas por parte de Iberostar, sigan las redes, entren a la página de Iberostar, que viene más a detalle todo lo que las implementaciones. Y gracias.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That was amazing. And to just learn a little bit more about what Iberostar is doing was great. And there's a huge team from Iberostar here as well from their sustainability program, Wave of Change. So feel free to grab them if you want to learn any more about that. It's my great pleasure to now welcome someone who is no stranger to the coral restoration community. It will always step up and lead wherever you ask him to introduce our next round of speakers, my good friend, Fanor Montoya Maya.
I only danced 2 songs yesterday on my hip. Definitely years have passed now, and the reason I mention that is because I've been told that this year we're celebrating 35 years of restoration work in the Dominican Republic and 15 years of work in Belize. And the person responsible for that progress, that work, pioneering, leading, training others, and inspiring, is here with us today. He doesn't know that he's my silent mentor, and that very pleased to know that he came back after retirement from a depressive moment. So I'm very honored to introduce the first coral gardener, very first true coral gardener, and the legend, Dr. Austin Bowden-Kerby.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. Buenos dias. Okay. Apparently, this is not working, so I have to be here. Okay. Okay. Is this going to be working? If I go over here, can you? Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, set. Okay. So, actually, I'm correcting Fanor already. This is the 30th anniversary of the beginning of coral restoration in the Caribbean. Puerto Rico is the beginning. Yay! Good morning, Puerto Rico. Yeah. This is the 20th anniversary of the coral work in Jamaica. Andrew, wherever you are. This is the 20th anniversary of coral work in Honduras. Kalina, wherever you are. This is the 20th anniversary of Punta Cana work in Dominican Republic and the 15th year of Fragments of Hope and the work in Belize. Okay? So I'm at a family reunion here, and at family reunions, we grieve the losses of those who have passed, and we celebrate the birth of those who have come. And I'm celebrating the babies out there, and I'm also grieving the loss of the corals and also colleagues who have passed. So today I'm talking about Reefs of Hope. We finally have convinced the United Nations to endorse a coral-focused program. And this program is called Arrecifes de la Esperanza, or Reefs of Hope. Okay, and this is a global program. It is not an NGO. I don't actually own it. We all own it. And many of us are using these techniques that are in Reefs of Hope. These are core issues that have been identified that we can all agree with. So this is my talk today. And that's the finished Bula Reef that we were on that video that we were building. Okay. This is the old version. Okay, this is the old version, I think. Oh, well, so I'm going to just wing it, okay? So this is Christmas Atoll, Christmas Island in south of Hawaii in the Pacific. And in the mass bleaching of 2014 to 2016, 95% of these corals died. And this is before you had this big problem in the Caribbean. So I went here, I was asked to go there, I went there in 2016, and we looked for corals. For 4 days we looked. A gropper used to dominate these reefs. We found one colony after 4 days of searching, and that's the colony. It was only the size of my fist. I was discouraged because all of the corals I planted in Fiji for many years, they died in 2014. And here I was seeing Kiribati, their corals have died. Not just the corals they were growing, but all the reef. And then I had an idea. We looked inside the very hot lagoon, and we realized if we had moved those corals, there were corals there that could survive 35. If we moved them to the outer reef, it only got 33 degrees there. We could have had a lot of corals. Okay. How do I turn this? This is not working. Oops. Sorry, guys, I'm not techno-savvy. I don't know how to go backwards. Okay, so I'm not going backwards then. Okay, so in Fiji, we have very, very many shallow hot water areas. The Caribbean, maybe we have to have a funeral for those hot water corals mostly. But I was hoping that Cuba, that Belize especially, these places where wide reefs that you will have some very hot water, where corals will be found. We have to recognize something. How do corals learn how to live in hot water? And I ask you that question now. Where did they evolve thermal resilience? And it's in that top
very top layer, I call the hot tub. Have you been on the reef in the low tide, when the tide is low on the summer, and you lie down, oh my God, it's so hot? That is where corals have learned to deal with heat, in that layer. And I don't see people studying the hot tub layer. But this is where all the resilience we have has evolved. It hasn't evolved in the cold water. Okay? So when we recognize this, we realize how precious those hot water corals are. The problem with this is, what I learned in Christmas Island is that if we leave our corals in the hot tub, they will perish. Right? If you stay in a hot tub that's above your proper temperature, you will die. And they have this caution. Same with the corals. If it gets to 38, they're going to die. This is one of the typical hot pockets in Fiji. And you can see the shallow water. Sometimes the corals are out of the water. Don't even feel guilty. Take the whole colony. Get it out of there. How many years can those shallow water corals live? Their days are numbered unless you save their lives. Okay? So the strategy for Reefs of Hope is moving corals from hot to cold, or hotter to colder. And this is one of our gene banks. So one of the first strategies is we create gene banks. So we need to start gene banking our corals in one location so that they can be protected. If we have them concentrated, you can shade the nursery when there's a mass bleaching. But you do want to locate it in a sweet spot. What is a sweet spot? Un sitio dulce, right? What is that sweet spot? It's a place that has good water circulation. It's a place that the water's a little bit cooler, 1 or 2 degrees cooler than most of the reefs. And you want it protected from hurricanes, from cyclones. Now, in República Dominicana at Punta Cana, we have a sweet spot. And in 2004, we put our nursery in that sweet spot. And it's got good water motion, but the waves go right over it. And it's got good circulation, and it is a place where corals survive during bleaching. And that's the oldest coral nursery in the world, at Punta Cana. Victor, you worked on it, right? So, and I'm proud to say that I have something that still exists. And now, yes, last night with Felix, we went to Jamaica on Google Earth, and we identified some sweet spots in Jamaica. Okay? And anybody can do that. Maybe there's a sweet spot near here where the corals can survive. Okay, so we grow them on ropes and we harvest them. And so this is the final product. We also go into the very shallow waters. And so when we saw this hot water coming, we made an emergency plan. And we convinced the resort, the reason we're spelling out the word bula means life, vida, right? Vida en el mar. Right? Vida en el gente, in el mundo. Okay? We spelled it out because the people are proud of it. Okay? And this has 2,000 coral genotypes secured in water. They did not bleach. 80% of the corals we left behind not only bleached, but they died. So we have proof of concept. Okay, this is what it looks like in the water. Beautiful. Okay? And so this is the strategy. We now can trim them. We plant them on A-frame structures because most of the corals are planted by children, because that's so important for the future. And we make a structure so that we don't want the corals to be touching the bottom and getting the bacteria and so forth. And we want the fish to have a place to live. So these A-frame structures are coated with they're coated with epoxy. We plant them in the shore with the children. We put them on the boat, and we always water them and put them in the ocean. And we're making patches of healthy coral for the fish, and the fish clean the reef, and the clean reef can recruit babies. Many people in the audience don't understand. The Acropora coral are very smelly, or aromatic, right? That smell is critical for the health and ecology of the reef. When the acroporas are gone, the reef doesn't smell like a reef to the baby corals, and the corals can't find it. So they found in Japan that coral, that chemical It lasts for just a few minutes in the water, but the corals find it irresistible, and they will settle. So the fish clean the rocks, the coral babies settle. This clock is wrong, no? So, okay, so, am I finished? Okay, I'm finished. Okay, but this clock is wrong. It's going backward.
You gave me the power to
Okay.
stop when you were over
Okay,
time.
so I want you to, everybody, before I go, if you're interested in Reefs of Hope, just do a Google search, Reefs of Hope UNESCO, and it is a paradigm, and everybody can join, and please look into Reefs of Hope. And it involves a tourism component, community component, coral component, and we all can participate, sorry. But that clock is wrong.
And the first day that I said that I make a lot of mistakes, and I continue to make, so thank you for correcting me, Austin. For the next, my career started in active restoration started in 2013 when I went to the Seychelles and to join the Reef Rescuers project. Back then was the largest coral restoration project in the world in terms of production in situ. From there, I went to the Maldives one occasion to train the first cohort of restoration practitioners with the University of Milano Bicocca, and there I met a young Italian PhD student there, very eager, very keen to learn. He was helping us with the training and that, and today I'm very pleased to present and introduce to you the leader today of the Reef Rescuers project in the Seychelles, Dr. Luca Saponari.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todos. I would like to start this talk with a little recording that comes from the island in Seychelles where I work. No, maybe. No. Yes. Okay, maybe you can hear a little bit. That was a bird song. So let's step a little bit for 1 second on land. So now, okay, imagine you are on this island and you hear this song. And you're happy because this is the song that saved an island. And we can hear this song today because of one of the most successful restoration projects in the world. Well, let's start from the beginning. Around under 50 years ago, the local island in Seychelles were used, as you can see, for palm tree plantation or cinnamon plantation. Obviously, huge collapse for the biodiversity. And one of the most impacted species in the Seychelles was this, the singer, this little bird, land bird, 8-9 centimeters height, critically endangered on the red list, IUCN, endemic of Seychelles, but locally extinct on every island except for a little corner of a mangrove forest on Cousin Island, the island where I work. In 1959, only 23 adults were left alive in this little corner. So very near to the extinction. But then the turning point. BirdLife International decided to stop this extinction trend, and they purchased the island, and they started a big restoration project. They cleared the business area of the plantation to let the vegetation, the natural vegetation, come back, and recover the population of this little bird. In a few years, the population rise up, 320 individuals in the 80s, and then in 2015, the population was so high that the breeding pairs were moved to other islands in the Seychelles to recover the population, and the IUCN changed from critically endangered to near threatened. So a huge restoration success. And not only for this species, but other 100 species benefit from it. Tortoises, sea turtles, seabird, land birds, lizard, insects, and so on. Today, Kuzan is one of the most important nesting area for ox-billed turtle in the entire Western Indian Ocean. It is home to 50,000 more pairs of seasonal seabird, and it was found to be the island with the highest lizard biomass in the world. But the restoration didn't stop on land. The Nature Seychelles, the NGO that took over the management in 1998, strong with a successful principle of restoration from land, started to bring those principles in the water and start a restoration program in 2010, the Reef Rescuers, that today is ongoing. And also in this case, with all the challenges that we know, but slowly the life is coming back underwater as well. So a connection of ecosystem from land to the sea. And not only Kuzan recovered ecologically, but it's also an example of ecotourism, a model that was replicated also on other islands. Kuzan is also financially self-sufficient. It can ensure job position for locals. It boosts the economy of the nearby island. Tourists need to get an accommodation, a restaurant, to charter boats to Kuzan to visit this island. It fuels science and knowledge. A lot of projects, papers have been published that are still ongoing. A lot of research projects are still ongoing, both on land and in the water. So Kuzan is a proof, is an evidence that restoration works, not only for one species, the singer, the Seychelles warbler, but also for all the other species on land and in the water. It is a proof that restoration benefits local community, benefits everything that is around the restoration project. And maybe if we can get a lesson from this story, from the Kuzan journey and the Seychelles warbler and the Reef Rescuers, as the CEO of Nature Seychelles, Dr. Nirmal said, restoration is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It works if a group of people, a stakeholder, commits for long-term objective. Then restoration works. We can bring back life on this planet. And Kuzan is the evidence. One species, one habitat, one island at a time. Thank you.
Thanks, Luca. Thanks to Luca and Austin for kind of taking us to some places we often don't get to go and learning a bit about the restoration journey that's going on there, just as we're learning about everybody's restoration journey over the course of this week. Our next talk is going to take us in a very different direction of those two programs that are very community-driven, on the ground, and we're going to go into the world of deep tech. AI has been the buzzword of the last year, and it will continue to be a major influence on our life and a major influence on our field. And we need to learn how to use trusted AI in a smart way. We need to learn how to use it both to enhance our productivity in our day-to-day work, but to maximize our understanding of the data that we utilize, to be able to pull out insights that we otherwise would not be able to pull out. And I think we also have the opportunity to use it even within meetings like this. And I'm going to challenge our next speaker to actually think about that and think about how we can take all of the amazing content that we have at a meeting like this and somehow distill the practical points of it down in real time by the end of the week. The amount of content that was in this room last night with the posters is amazing. There's some great stuff that is here and there that may be lost unless we find a way to surface that information. And I believe that one of the additional tools that we can use AI for is helping us surface information in meetings just like this. But the person who can tell us how to do that and to tell us how to do a lot of other things is our next keynote speaker, Dr. Tim Dodwell from the award-winning company DigiLab, who is really on the cutting edge of learning how to maximize the use of AI in a trusted way for the field. So welcome, Tim, all the way from the UK to give our next keynote speak.
Thanks, Tom. Oh, here we go. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I remember when I gave my first talk with my PhD supervisor told me off for being really opinionated. And he said, until you're a professor, a CEO, or you're invited to give a plenary, are you allowed to give an opinion? You should stick to fact. There we go. So I'm Professor Tim Dodwell. I'm a machine learner. Delighted to be here. And I always find it really nice to be invited into other people's community and learn how they geek out about things, the things that get them excited and interested, and the things they do in their day-to-day lives. And really think about how my field, AI, machine learning, could support a community like yours in being more productive. So it's not, and how it supports great domain expertise, knowledge in being a practitioner, but then enables you to do the things that you love and are really good at better and more efficiently. And hopefully I can sort of introduce some ideas, areas that we've been starting looking at in coral reef conservation. I must say, I'm a coral newbie. I'm a surfer. I love the water, but I don't know huge amounts about corals, so it'd be nice to me. But sort of talk about a few of the programs that we're looking at to think about how methods can make this reef restoration more productive. The era of uncertainty. I think, like in everything, even in corals, the ocean, technology, when things change rapidly, they introduce uncertainty. With that comes huge opportunity, but it also comes with risk. This is where I have my chance to be opinionated. I'd like to tell you about two of the biggest challenges that I see in AI. And actually, they're barriers that mean that we need to overcome them so fields like yours can adopt AI at speed and make the most out of them. So one of the big problems, I believe, and if any of people that run projects in general should always ask this question: how do we quantify the return on investment? How do we realize the value of AI in the projects that we do? So every organization that I've talked to, and maybe you're the same and you can relate to this, is the simple fact that you sit on huge amounts of data. Organizations sit on huge amounts of data. This looks like buckets of data, it looks like spreadsheets, it looks like pictures, it looks like videos, all sorts of data. Now at the top, we ask questions about how should we be more efficient about what we do? Where should we plant our corals? Are we putting enough sensors? How do I measure these efficiently? These are very human-based questions, but a lot of the truth lives in the data that we need to access, but a lot of the domain expertise sit in the decision makers or the people that ask the questions. But the real pain is this huge gap between the two, and I call it the data to decisions gap. And this is the genuine pain. Like, how do I find the data? I might not even know I've got data. What did someone do once last year on this topic? And this is where a huge amount of effort is placed, and a huge lot of opportunity and answers are missed, I believe. Now, the problem with AI, slides have jumped around, but it's okay. The problem with AI is that it's kind of this hope that AI can look at your data and somehow build connections in your data. So you can understand how this kind of sea of data that you've got is connected. You can build correlations in it, and that seems really helpful. But the actual problem with that is you've actually put a layer on top of your data which involves quite sophisticated technology. You need to maintain it. You need skilled people that understand about the mathematical methods. You need hardware to be able to run these methods on. And actually, you've now got methods that allow you to say, well, even though I don't have data there, what data might I have if I could have collected data there? So you've actually generated even more data than when you first had it. And so you're now in this situation where you haven't really resolved the problem, right? The problem is still like, how do I most efficiently use the resources to be better at coral reef restoration? But what you've actually done is you've taken your data, you've put a layer of AI on top, you've generated more data, and you've made it more confusing for people to access. And so even though it might feel like you've got closer, you now have this big gap between what I would say is the models to decisions gap. And this is really significant. And I think lots of programs that try and adopt AI haven't realized this yet, because they get to the end of the project, they might have a sophisticated neural net to do X, but what did it actually give them? What impact did it have on the field? And I think the new frontier is really trying to address this. So when I go to my conferences in my community, at the moment the buzzword is agentic systems. Agentic systems are kind of the frontier of AI at the moment. And what these are doing, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you, and I spoke to quite a few of you last night, your interaction with AI has been more recently because of ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a large language model. It basically allows us to build context around what we say. We can build connections with language which maybe aren't the same words, but we can sort of map context. A good example of this might be like normally a picture of a cat and the word cat aren't really close together. One's a whole load of colored pixels, and the other one is 3 letters. But the fact that we can start bringing connections between these two, that between language and data we can make connections, then there's this new hope of possibility that this layer between a question, like how do I find this piece of data? What's the most efficient way of collecting data in this case? Can be interpreted not only in language, but it can be connected to the data. And this has been a huge breakthrough in the field of AI, and you're all, if you use ChatGPT, are reaping some of the benefits of that. The real challenge is that's only one part of the story. What the new frontier in AI or of agentic systems is really looking at is about how you orchestrate AI models now to do tasks. So what this means is if I ask a question, I can also understand what the AI models that we're building in this AI models layer is trying to achieve, and through natural language, these can be orchestrated using AI itself. And this means that we can build workflows which kind of orchestrate the steps or sequences we need to take to use the AI models to answer questions. And this is really exciting. And you know, there's huge amounts of work to do in this field, but I think it's going to be moving very rapidly, and there's lots of opportunities which this field will hopefully benefit from. So the second big problem, I think, which is really interesting, is the fact that you've now got systems, you've got multi-agent systems, and they're choosing what they do to answer your question. And so agent, when we say agent, most people think like something sinister, James Bond-esque. The agent actually means agency, right? Like, so you're giving AI agency over the decisions it makes. What data should I use? What model should I pick to answer your question? And then it sort of fundamentally comes back to, well, can we trust it? Should we trust it? And this is the thing that I get really interested in. If you're in my company, DigiLab, you'll hear me say the Pink's pants analogy. And this is an interesting problem. So what I mean by the pink pants problem is that the fact that old AI, like the Amazon AI, like the recommender systems, if I log on to Amazon, it might recommend that I buy a pair of pink pants. And great, I mean, it's probably right. I like pink pants. But if I buy them or not, the outcome doesn't really matter, right? Like, I don't buy pink pants. I buy lime green pants, purple pants, or no pants. Like, this is all okay. The outcomes are not that bad. I might look silly, but the outcome doesn't matter. And that's kind of like the old school AI, where you didn't really need to measure uncertainty. But in lots of the fields that I work in, uncertainty really matters. Like, if I'm going to use AI to make a decision, I actually want to understand why does it make that decision, what's led it to that decision, what might happen, what might else happen, what may not happen but could happen. And I think that's the real difference in applying AI to the pink pants situation to doing it with coral reef restoration. Like, if you're going to make multi-million-pound decisions about how you align resources, or do you trust results, or report scientific results on something that's really fundamental and key, you need to quantify uncertainty. The really interesting thing here, which I like, which is a bit of a side, is I'm British. So when I say pants, I actually mean underwear. But I generated the picture on the left with one of our diffusion AI models, and it's obviously trained on American data, right? Which I thought was quite interesting. So, what do we need to trust AI? And I think this is a fundamental question. And I've actually been going around talking to lots of organizations, including water companies, reef restoration, renewables, energy companies, infusion, fission, healthcare, and tried to distill down what they mean, what they need in an algorithm to be trusted. The first thing, so I believe there are 4 fundamental points, 4 things that you should insist when you're working on a pink pants problem, right? So we need to understand why. And so explainability. Why has an algorithm predicted what it's predicted? What's led it to predicting what it's predicted? Explainability is a complicated one. The complaint says that AI is always like quite black box, but so are humans, right? Like, often when we say, well, why did you do that? Or why do you believe that? We have to retrospectively think, well, what in my experience led me to do that? What information are you using to have that opinion? So explainability only needs to be explainable up to the level humans are explainable, really. But they should be able to point at experience influenced the data that they've been trained on, which tells them why that decision has happened. For me, I'm a statistician by nature. So understanding uncertainty is a key part, right? So in many decisions that we make, it's not we don't want one answer. We don't want just a single prediction. We want the range of possible predictions that might happen. But often when we're in safety-critical, regulated industries or industries that matter, we want the cases that are unlikely to happen but are still plausible. And because we want to build, design, make processes that mean that we're robust to these kind of possible outcomes. And I think often people use the word digital twin a lot. For me, the what-if scenario is the key part of a digital twin. It allows you to make predictions. You say, if we choose to do X, what might happen? And then how do I mitigate against those circumstances? Not many algorithms can do this successfully at the moment in AI, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Secure by design. People care about their data. They often want to collaborate, but they also want to keep their cutting edge. Like, it is a competition, after all. Like, they want to be the first to have a result, achieve something, but they also want to share their data so that the overall field can grow. A lot of the data, when people try and use, I gave a talk about ChatGPT to a load of executives in the UK, and none of them realized that by using it, you were actually passing your data to OpenAI. And so I saw a few people scurry out when I asked them, did they have an AI policy? And they hadn't really realized that you're actually passing your data. So you need data which respects your privacy. It respects how you want to share information with each other, but you make it in such a way that it's secure by design. And I think that's a really important part. And it might be for your field, it might be less for field, but I work in areas like nuclear decommissioning as well, where it's absolutely essential. And I put the last one in, but I actually think it's probably one of the most important things, and particularly important in fields where maybe not all of you program, right? At the moment, if you log on to an AI website, what you'll see is it will feel like you're not allowed to come and play with AI unless you can program. Like there's this big barrier, it's very dev-centric, and you don't really know. So I talked to my wife, she's a potter. She hasn't got a clue how she engages with AI or how she would use AI. ChatGPT's been great because it's probably one of the first times that it's been more accessible, and that's when people start to use it, and that's a really positive. But actually, we need to build tools that are accessible to non-programmers, and by people engaging and using tools, they then can build trust in them. A lot of trust is about understanding how things work, understanding they're a tool. A good example of this is AI that you use every day, or probably used to use every day, is Google, right? And so you log into Google, you type a search, you click go, you get 10 answers. You kind of learn how to use that and say, well, have I got a good answer, have I not? You don't log on to Google. There used to be like a lucky dip button. So you don't log into Google, hit the lucky dip button, copy the first answer that you get and just submit it, right? You're used to using AI tools, but you need to get used to using all the range of possible AI tools that you can use and understand they're not perfect. You have to kind of question their use. But you can only do that by them being accessible. And if they're hidden behind a programming language, it becomes more and more not the case. So the problem is that modern AI approaches don't address these challenges. They're not born with uncertainty quantification built in. The technologies that we're building aren't naturally explainable. Security hasn't been put in by design, and often for the big tech companies, is actually part of their business model to collect data. And I think usability is a hard thing that we need the tools to develop more, and we really need to think about the end user. The second thing is contrary to LinkedIn, AI isn't the best solution for most things in life. Right? AI is really good at some things, right? Really, really, really good. Segmentation is a really good example. It's really good at lots of complicated, mundane tasks, and you should definitely use it. It's not good at some things. And there's some things where putting a straight line through a set of dots and drawing inference is good enough, and you should still definitely do that. So whilst I love AI, I always try and say, if you can do it without AI, you probably should. So Digilab is a company I founded 2.5 years ago, which stemmed out of my research group. I used to like writing lots of papers, but they used to just get hidden on the shelf. And for me, it was all about trying to use AI in a way that could have a bigger impact on what we do. And I started working in the water sector, developed some algorithms that reduced the amount of coagulant chemicals that they put in one of my local rivers by 40% and increased the quality of the water. And for me, that was a massive driver that actually, instead of just sat here writing papers, we could use AI to have a huge impact on the world. But the company is around building a trustworthy AI platform in the cases when uncertainty matters. So just a bit about who we are. Bottom picture is Exeter. If you're ever in the UK, we'd always love to see people. And it's not always that sunny. I have to show a sunny picture of the UK. It's normally raining, right? So we're a diverse group. We're a unique bunch, a lot of climbers, a lot of surfers. We're striving to be a 50-50 gender balance company, and we've got to about 40% women so far, which is great. We're a 4-day-week company, which is very unusual in the UK. So really trying to build value, a community feel to the company, as well as doing great stuff. The picture on the left highlights what we mean by our uncertainty. So our core underpinning technology is something called a deep Gaussian process. That doesn't really matter. It's described by that picture. So imagine I have data points, and I'm trying to fit a curve through them. There's not one single curve that might explain that data. And so actually what you really want to do is you want to fit lots of curves through data, and by looking at the distribution of the curves that might agree with the data, you get an assessment of uncertainty. And so that's a simple example or picture that you can demonstrate. Our underpinning methods essentially try and do this for all AI algorithms that we develop, and we try and use this so that we can quantify uncertainty, make it core of the explainability part of our algorithms. The great thing about the methods that we have focused on are they're robust to limited or noisy data. So people that develop AI algorithms often use data sets which are perfect. If anyone has ever tried to do data science in the real world, the data is never perfect. It has all sorts of missing values in it. I even found a spreadsheet a year ago with "I'm bored, I've gone home" in one of the columns. And so this is super typical. So you need methods that are robust to this, because that's just the real world of using data in the real world. And the other thing is to do it in a way that integrates with expert knowledge. AI that says, "Don't worry, I've got this, I can do your job, I can learn from the data," is not helpful in any way. So you need AI which enables people to put their opinion, their prior opinion on it, and enhance the output by using expert knowledge rather than trying to replace. And then the final part, which is the accessibility bit. My main focus over the last 18 months is building a platform which makes a programming language accessible to people that don't program. So here's an example. We have like a canvas. It's a drag and drop workflow. It basically fully represents machine learning language or algorithms, but not with the scary abstraction of having to be a programmer. And I found that this has been the best way to get non-programmers to engage with it, that they can understand workflows in a kind of conceptual way, rather than having to spend a lot of time developing programming skills and knowledge. It's not that they can't do it, they just got better things to do with their time. Right? An idea of the sort of areas that we work in before I talk about the Coral ones. We work a lot in fusion. That's probably our biggest area, about how do we get this wonderful challenge of putting the sun on Earth in a bottle and creating completely clean energy, safe clean energy. Digital twins, accelerating digital twins. This is actually some work we did in Lucerne about air pollution. The far right one is a water network. Like how do we place sensors on where do we place sensors on a water network to optimally observe the system? So lots of different areas. And for me, that's kind of the beauty of AI. It's just general. And then I can think, well, how do I apply this to coral reef conservation? So I said I'm a newbie to coral reef. I'm very delighted to have learned lots from the team at KAUST. It's a fairly early program. It's probably been going in earnest for 3 to 4 months. We've engaged for almost a year now. Mark, Liz, and Dave have been great and very patient with me, explaining about what they do. And it's been a really fascinating learning journey for us. I just want to sort of highlight 3 programs that we're working in. Early stages, but just give you an idea of what you could do with AI and just to start a conversation. So challenge 1, and I write them like user stories, and what I mean like that, what do you want to achieve, right? I want to measure my corals, right? So Liz showed me on the reef the kind of very lengthy process by which you have to get measurements. Taking pictures, and then outside, like looking at a grid, like really quite laborious progress, very time-consuming, and this is on a reef like scale that's relatively small. So if you've got ambitions to scale this up, this is just going to get worse, this problem. So can we use AI to help with this? Diving, I say Liz is expensive. It's not particularly Liz. As Liz is a diver, she has to spend time in the water. And so it wasn't really a complaint about how expensive Liz was. It was just the fact that can we take this kind of expensive resource of humans out the loop in terms of data collection? One thing that I've always find interesting is how do you measure things at the moment? Is it perfect, right? So when we're assessing how good AI has to be to add value, it only has to be, like, if it's better than what you already do, is that good enough, right? I think the obsession often is to spend a huge amount on AI to produce, like, the perfect result. But I've borrowed this from Google. But, like, if you kind of measure a coral in that crude way, maybe that's just this kind of scale of accuracy and measurement you need. And therefore, you only need to develop an algorithm that's good enough to measure it, like, maybe better than that. And so our challenge, and I think the really nice thing about this, the return on investment is clear. Like, if we can reduce something that takes months down to days, the benefit of AI can be quantified nice and easily. And that for me, makes it a really good AI program. So this was meant to be a video, but I was struggling to embed it. You can imagine this is a typical kind of frame under which corals, and Liz is swimming around this, taking a video, right? So that's our data. So the challenge is, can we accurately measure the corals? So here's the workflow, right? And each of these are quite sophisticated machine learning models. But in my sort of picture of what the product looks like, they just represent a block, right? They just do a thing. So the process that we follow is we first segment. So a video is just a shot of pictures, right? So we segment the corals out of the image. The second part is a really interesting part, is because you're taking a frame of reference, you're taking a picture, you have to estimate from where that picture was taken. So the red swirl is this wonderful pirouette that Liz has done when she's taken a picture, is basically estimating where that picture comes from. Once you've done that, you essentially get lots of pictures of your corals at different angles. And from that, you can reconstruct a 3D point cloud using ray tracing. You then extract from that all the parts that are like the rays when you look at them, or the points which represent corals, and then you can estimate a volume. The key thing here is there's uncertainty at every step of that. Like, there's uncertainty about how accurately you can do segmentation. So you need a method that quantifies uncertainty there. You can't exactly know where the picture was taken from, so you need to quantify uncertainty there. Then the process of generating a point cloud from that introduces uncertainty, and the number of points I generate, the more points I generate, the more accurate my volume measurement will be, but it comes with cost, so I introduce more uncertainty. So what we mean by quantifying uncertainty here is understanding how at each stage, in each of our machine learning methods, how does uncertainty propagate through, and what does it mean about the uncertainty that I can quote when I'm saying a volume for a coral. And if that's within a typical tolerance that practitioners are happy with, then I feel validated and comfortable that this is a method that we can use. This is really exciting. A second one, and this is to answer Tom's question. The answer is hell yes, we can do this, right? So ChatGPT is a large language model, and it's kind of dumb the way it works, right? So you ask a question, and it literally just rolls out one word at a time. So it doesn't have any concept of planning what it's going to say using information. It's just been trained on the next word. And so it just literally rolls out an answer. And it does surprisingly well, I always think, that it just literally spits out. I know some people that talk like this as well, but like we won't talk about it. There are new technologies that are related to ChatGPT-style methods, which allow you to attach knowledge bases to the same style. These are called retrieval augmented generation, formerly known as RAG. Doesn't really make a difference. The way that I see it is someone asks a question Imagine that your data is literally a skip of data. You can then cherry pick the relevant information from that skip of data, and you basically use that as context. That context is then fed into the large language model alongside the question, and then you generate an answer. The key thing for this is it makes it auditable, in the sense you know the information that's used in its context to answer the question. So next year, or we'll do it after this, all the PDFs, everything that's been done to generate any of this topic can go into the knowledge base, and then you could just ask questions like, who spoke about this? Who spoke about that? Did we discuss this topic? And it would be able to retrieve the information from the set of documents you did. These are really, really useful technologies. With Koss, we're actually looking at taking the Coral database, the SQL database, and basically putting a system around it like this, which enables people to chat to their data. Like, give me all the corals that were in tank 32 last year. Like, that's a boring thing to have to answer, but someone has to do it, but AI is really good at those kind of tasks. The really good thing about this is because you have the data sits with you, you have permissions over the data, these algorithms are completely secure by design. So you could have a community-wide one, you could have a common knowledge base that you shared, you could also have your own data, and you can structure these in a way that kind of respects however you want to share your data, which I think is really important. Here's an example we did for nuclear decommissioning. Someone told me that they had to read a 254-page report to answer one question, and it took them the whole day. We chucked the document into this and started chatting to it. They found their answer in about 2 minutes. So these are really, really important technologies for productivity. The final one, and this was a video, but I can talk about it, is, so you might recognize the island. This has a series of sensors that measure temperature over the reef. So a fundamental question is, one, first of all, can I use the data? So it's temperature data, flow data, there's other data on these sensors. Can I use that to predict what happens in between sensors? So this is a regression challenge in machine learning, but basically, can I reconstruct the full field of temperature from a discrete number of sensors? The real question is, because you're not measuring it everywhere and the data is noisy and you're using a sensor, you're going to get uncertainty in these measurements. So can I quantify the uncertainty? Secondly, because you don't measure it anywhere, wherever you make a prediction away from a sensor, you're extrapolating away from data, and that therefore comes with uncertainty. So you can also quantify your ability to predict data where you don't have sensors. Now, the really fundamental, interesting question then comes for me is, well, where should you put your sensors on a reef to minimize your uncertainty in being able to observe what you want to observe? Like, how many sensors do I need, right? And for me, that's the return of investment problem, is if I can get away with half the number of sensors, that's not only hardware that I need to buy, but that's actually things that I need to maintain. And so if I can get away with half the numbers of sensors with no reduction in uncertainty, then that's a really productive use of resources on restoration, I believe. And I've timed it pretty well. So my clock's working, I think. So I just wanted to finish with a few things. I believe that AI has huge potential generally, but I really like how my early interactions with your community suggest that there are lots of areas we can help. And that's not replacing what you do, that's just providing you frameworks by which you can do what you do more productively and enjoy the science and focus on getting in the water and working with local communities. So that's been great. A few things that I would always sort of encourage you to do. If you're looking to adopt an AI project, I'd be really happy to talk to you. But can you quantify the return on investment? Like, how are you going to say good is good? Like, this was a success. Often I see lots of AI, people saying, oh, we need to do AI, but they haven't really thought about that answer carefully. And I think if you're really kind of persistent about saying, yeah, but how are we going to measure good? What's good enough? What does success look like? I think it really helps you use AI in a way that's actually quite focused and really helpful. Really, please do treat AI with healthy skepticism. It is just math, right? It's nothing special. I know they design the algorithms like they interact like humans. We were joking last night that people say please and thank you to ChatGPT. It doesn't care. It's just a math algorithm. It's very polite that you're nice to it, and I'm not going to stop you from being nice to it, but you don't need to be. But you should remember it's just a method. It's just part of your toolbox, and you should treat it with healthy skepticism when using it, and try and think about where do the uncertainties, where do the biases live in what you do. Hopefully, along with other companies, there's quite a big shift in making AI accessible now, and hopefully we can lead the way on that, but it's a really important part. So there are good AI tools out there which mean that you don't need a PhD in comp sci, which is super. The other thing, we had a workshop Monday, which one of my colleagues from Digilab was here with the Koss team. We've got a workshop tomorrow as well, but really starting the community conversation. Like, what AI tools could you build? Maybe it's a segmentation algorithm that's fine-tuned for corals. Maybe it's coral identification algorithms. Maybe it's just a tool set of these RAG tools that enable you to look at your data or ask questions about your data. What do they look like? And I'd be really interested in learning what you think you could use AI for. And thank you for your attention.
Working. Thank you, Tim. As someone who is a college student and someone who's part of Gen Z, I hear a lot of really negative stuff about AI, so it's really cool to hear how it can be used kind of in my upcoming field for good. Next up, we have a speaker who really hits close to home for me, Jennifer Moore. Originally from New Jersey, Jen fell in love with the ocean, visiting the shore every summer, and solidified her desire to dedicate her life to it while attending sea camp in the Florida Keys as a teenager. Jen has been a celebrated NOAA resource manager for over 2 decades, winning numerous awards, including the Department of Commerce Gold Medal for her outstanding accomplishments. Currently, Jennifer focuses on the recovery of the threatened Caribbean coral reef ecosystems as the senior manager for Mission Iconic Reefs at the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Someone like myself who has grown up with the sanctuary in my backyard, I'm really proud of Jen, and I'm really thankful to her for dedicating her life to protecting my backyard. So with that, welcome up, Jen.
Thank you so much, Cara. So we are honored and excited to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of Mission Iconic Reefs, which launched this week in 2019. The idea for Mission Iconic Reefs was born at the first Reef Futures through conversations, just like you guys are all having conversations now that are likely to spawn amazing new initiatives in the future. And just like Reef Futures has grown over the past 6 years, so too has Mission Iconic Reefs. And even through that growth, we have faced real challenges, and we always knew that we would have to be fighting an uphill battle, particularly in the location where we are working in the Florida Keys, and that we would have to adaptively manage. And yet, we're still buoyed by the dedication of our incredible team and our partners, which they're who make Mission Iconic Reefs work. And you will hear their voices in this trailer that we're about to premiere. And it's going to be it's a trailer of a soon-to-be-released longer-form film about Mission Iconic Reefs. And I want to echo one point loudly here that you will hear in the video. We got a lot of criticism, but what would it be like if we were not implementing Mission Iconic Reefs in the Florida Keys? If we did not have these biorepositories of threatened species to start to build back from? If we had not had those corals on the reef doing their jobs for the last 5 years? If all of us were not fighting this fight, we wouldn't be set up for recovery and repair. So, to the video.
The marine heat wave of 2023 came after our reefs had already been suffering.
Yeah, last summer was just, for those of us in the industry and investing our lives in trying to grow these corals and put them back, it just shook us to the core.
I think that it's very easy to see the summer bleaching event that took out the overwhelming majority of corals that restoration practitioners have been planting in the last decade or so, and they'll say, what was the point of any of that? And to that I would counter, well, imagine what it would have been like if those corals hadn't been there. Imagine what it would be like if our nurseries were not a repository of critically endangered coral species. What would we have to build back from?
The Mission Iconic Reefs initiative is the largest restoration effort in Florida, and that job cannot be done by a single entity.
A group of very passionate and very knowledgeable scientists and practitioners got together and realized that this is the time where we need a really robust and novel intervention to actively restore reefs here in Florida, including these 7 what we call iconic reefs.
It's wonderful to hope, but we don't have to have hope. We have science, and it's telling us that there is that adaptive potential. Our coral reefs are certainly in trouble, and they're certainly struggling, but that's just another challenge that we have to meet.
This is who we are in the Florida Keys. So the health of this ecosystem is absolutely central to us as a community.
For me, I don't believe I am going to see the same reef that I was exposed to when I was 14, but somebody who's learning to dive now, I want them to tell the story of recovery. I want them to bear witness to, gosh, when I was 14 and learned to dive, you should have seen it. It wasn't so great, but wow, look at it now. When they're my age, that's their story. That's what I want.
Thank you, and happy birthday, Mission Iconic Reefs. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, a friend and colleague. Stuart Sandin is the Senior Director of the Center for Environmental Imaging at San Diego. CEI was founded to open access to technologies allowing us to archive imagery of the underwater world and to create digital replicas of those ecosystems. CEI was founded out of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UC San Diego, where Dr. Sandin is a professor holding the Elizabeth and Dene Oliver Chair in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. So please help me welcome Stuart to the stage.
Thanks. Well, good morning, everybody. I think I find an audience here of people who are going to agree with me that corals are among the most fascinating and inspiring organisms that exist on the planet. We can recognize that they're fragile, but yet robust. They live in a host of environments that span from the most aggressive environments down to very calm, peaceful environments. They span habitats from shallow to deep, from walls to flat surfaces. And in each of these places, they've found a way to thrive. There's some fundamental diversity that helps them to survive. As we consider the corals, though, we got to consider scale. An individual coral colony is probably that unit that we spend the most time thinking about. Whether it's at the polyp scale and the physiological reactions of those corals to the environment around it, or whether we're discussing the neighborhoods, their life, death, and growth. The coral colony is really where we're spending a lot of time thinking. We're thinking not just to understand it, but also to restore it and to preserve it. But oftentimes, our scale of concern is much larger than that scale of the colony itself. We may be curious about the distributions of corals, how many there are, where they are, and how they live. We may be trying to provide some descriptive statistics about a particular region, variation across that broad diversity of habitats in which they live, the broad diversity of geographies where we have a mandate to support these environments. To date, we've used methods that are more aggregated when we start to survey at broader scales. We lose some of that resolution about the colony scale in lieu of giving a summary that's at that regional scale. How many people here have done surveys? How many people here have used different forms of remote sensing data products? These are invaluable products for us to understand the distributions and statistical patterns of corals, but we sometimes lose sight of the data, the detail and the resolution of our friend, the coral colony. So what happens when our ambitions for our management efforts expand in scale, but our need for knowledge remains focused at that smallest scale? That's a challenge I want to tell you something about here today. In an effort to contribute to the Calloused Coral Restoration Initiative and their ambitious plans for enhancement of the coral reef around the island of Shusha in the northern Red Sea, there's interest in expanding the coral restoration efforts to cover a complete square kilometer, 100 hectares or 1 million square kilometers. As we do restoration, we know that we want to be looking at aggregate measures. How much coral is there? How many of them survive? And how many of them survive? And how well are they growing? But we also need to be working out what's happening with each colony. We would like to be able to understand that granular biology of the coral and the coral colony itself, that detail that we find from our observation, our natural observation at the colony scale. So we embarked on an imaging campaign to create a map that provided us that multi-scale view of this entire reefscape that would help to enhance the restoration efforts, but then also provide a vision of that coral reef. We're also thinking about this as a imaging or a visualization campaign that could be scaled to other geographies. So let me talk you through these scales. This is going to be familiar to us, of course. The coral colony is where we care. We care about whether this one lives or dies. Statistical metrics or population level data always depends upon how many corals grow, how many die, and how many are, well, and much more things like that. It depends upon each of these colony scale efforts. And this is where we want to be thinking, could I go visit virtually every one of these corals, this goniastria and its friends and neighbors? As we, as observers in the water, spend time looking at corals, we may try to get a bit of a landscape view by scaling out. By floating to the surface, let's say, going from being scuba diver looking at the coral colony, and now to be looking at the world from the scale of a snorkeler looking down. We can learn now this goniastria in the middle of the picture has a neighbor, has a few neighbors, and lives on top of a coral bommy, on top of a structure that provides some insights about where it may survive or not. But we know that we oftentimes want to see beyond the scale of the snorkeler. And advances in large area imaging have provided us an approach to pull together images across scales to make an emergent picture that's much bigger than the scale of each individual photograph. Here, this landscape view is pulled together, rendered into a three-dimensional model, and then projected as an ortho view. This type of language is what we see oftentimes when we use satellite views on land. But now in the water, we can do this to provide a broader landscape view that's not possible by being in the water. Water's in the way. But we can then expand further out. We can start to see further the different landscape features. We know that corals live in a seascape. We know that they span a broad diversity of habitats. Again, the reason why we have diversity. We have to recognize that. For this effort, we selected different operational units that scaled with the management units in Shusha Island. This quarter-hectare plot that you see highlighted in the middle, 50 meters by 50 meters, where we were able to start thinking about what types of interventions may or may not be used in this scale. This is valuable data for us to be able to design and to implement different management actions. As we start scaling out further, we recognize a couple operational challenges. The computational ability to take photographs and pull them together maxes out based upon some of the current algorithms that exist. We do have to chunk our data. But further, as we start getting to broader spatial scale, there's a challenge of observation. Reefs don't all look the same in every place. We do have these flat surfaces and we have walls. We have variation in depth. And we have to increase our modalities of image collection, going from in-water image collection, surface-towed vessels, and finding ways to georeference all of this with a complete mapping to GPS units. You can see this happening as we get to especially shallow habitats where some of our partners in the aerial space and drone space provide some complementary data. And we can emerge to the final scale, the reefscape scale. At this scale, we can get a complete view of what this reef looks like. What is the variation? Complementing benthic habitat maps and bathymetric maps, we now have an image-based data layer that allows us to investigate, to interrogate, and then to learn from this landscape to take action upon this landscape. This model was composed of over 3 million photographs that went into it, a point cloud that was in the hundreds of billions of points. It's a big data effort, but let's not get lost in the data. Let's focus on the applications of the data, because that's where we're at today. We can lay that grid back on top and start thinking about how would we use this if I could see anywhere. I can start to design where and when I'm going to take an intervention. I can start to be putting in that intervention and with time series of this, track the efficacy of that intervention. The important point here is that the user isn't stuck just looking at a gridded landscape, but instead can zoom into particular regions in this reefscape and take some stylistic and design-based views of this. How big is that sandy patch, and would I be able to fit different management or different restoration structures in this location? Can I put racks for my ex situ nursery in this area? And by modeling on top of this, different data layers, including flow, temperature, et cetera, we can start to think about which habitat it provides the conditions that are going to maximize my success. I can visualize what some of the restoration efforts may look like by putting out virtual restoration platforms. And I can start to get a feel for what's possible, rather than just what I could imagine in my mind. These data layers are based upon the integration of technology that includes a whole host of engineers. And these engineers are making incredible headway on a lot of new applications: robotics, advanced cyber infrastructure, data storage, et cetera. There are a host of experts I know in the field here today that are bringing these tools together. I want to encourage people to think about innovations, but to recognize that we still have to act today to put together the tools as we have them. The technology that has inspired Reef Futures has changed quite a bit over the last few years. I apologize for that last slide not being there. It's changed quite a bit over the last few years. When I came to the first CRC meeting that led to Reef Futures, we discussed the use of imaging. Today, we're using it in droves. I encourage you to talk with the people from KCRI, to talk to the people and the engineers in the room. Think about these novel tools that we have today to make sure that you can use this complementary technology to support your efforts, to enhance them, rather than to think of them as being off-putting and inaccessible. Thank you very much.
I'm very excited about this next talk because having worked with threatened corals for most of my career, one tool that has become absolutely invaluable is biobanking. And so I'm going to be introducing Dr. Jonathan Daly, who has worked in cryopreservation in aquatic species for over 20 years. And he leads biorepository development for corals in the Great Barrier Reef as part of the federally funded Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. His research is on the development, upscaling, and implementation of cryopreservation technologies and the establishment of biorepository systems and the processes in Australia and internationally. And I've had the great pleasure of working with Jon over the last several years on the Coral Biobank Alliance, and so I'm very excited to have him speak to us about this important tools. So please help me welcome Jon Daly.
Good morning, everyone. So this talk is, I'm sorry. Okay, so this talk is the second here at Reef Futures that's come from some work by the Coral Biorepository Alliance over the past year that's leading up to a workshop that we'll be holding this afternoon. And so today I'm going to make the case for why we need to take a coordinated global approach to coral biobanking by creating a global coral biorepository network. And so right now, we're at the beginning of a global coral biobanking gold rush. We've already heard a few stories about biobanking today, but there are more and more people who are wanting to incorporate biobanking efforts to protect and restore their local reefs and getting out there and starting to collect samples. But like all other gold rushes that have happened around the world through history, at times they're a bit chaotic and a bit uncoordinated. And so this really is entirely understandable, though, given what we've all seen and experienced on reefs around the world over the past few years. And so biobanking is happening at many different scales and in many different ways, and we're all just trying to do the best that we can with what we have and what we know. And so if you look at the types of biobanking that are happening, we've got live corals held ex situ in aquarium facilities, and this ranges from coordinated multi-institutional programs down to individual groups just collecting corals and holding them in tanks and trying to protect them. There's also cryobanking of coral germplasm, which at the moment is reasonably well coordinated, but we can take a cautionary tale from the world of wildlife biobanking, where it's not uncommon to have collections that start out with the best intentions, but then ultimately are abandoned, and so we don't want that to happen for coral. And increasingly there's sampling of tissues and DNA for genome and phenome analysis and for microbiomes. And of course there's the original form of biobanking of voucher samples in museums, and these are typically well managed but are not often linked to all of those other sample types and forms of biobanking. And so with all these different groups and approaches to biobanking, it would be really easy for us to end up with a bunch of disparate collections with everyone doing the same thing but in different ways, and that don't really match up and don't communicate to each other. And ultimately that can end up with duplication of effort, a lot of wasted resources and missed opportunities. But there's also the opportunity and the potential to create something that's much more than the sum of all of those parts. And so we want to harness the energy and enthusiasm out there for biobanking and put it towards not just creating biobanks, but to creating biorepositories. And so for that to happen, a standardized approach is going to be essential. And so as I touched on before, there are three main types of biobanking that are happening right now. We have live coral held ex situ in aquariums. We have living cells that are cryopreserved and can be used to generate new corals. And we have tissue and DNA samples in -80 freezers or in other storage media. And these sample types all have different collection and storage requirements and different potential end uses. But there's also a lot of overlap in how we manage these samples. And so if you're able to make it to Beth Ferschau's presentation on Tuesday, you would have seen the outcomes from a SWOT analysis that was undertaken over the past year by the Coral Biorepository Alliance. And that really set out to try and help understand the coral biobanking landscape around the world, just to see what was being done and where the gaps were, and starting to create some objectives that could be used to help standardize biobanking across all of these sample types to guide repository development. And so, as a starting point, it's really clear that we start to define the characteristics of what a coral biorepository needs to have, regardless of the types of samples that we're collecting. And so, firstly, a coral biorepository needs to be targeted, so there needs to be some kind of prioritization process. And this might be related to a species that's part of a restoration program, or it might be a species or group of species that have local or cultural significance. And it's essential that those samples are catalogued, ideally in an open access database system that tracks key metadata for every sample so that they can be traced back to the sea country or the reef or population or genotype that they originated from. Because these samples are only as good as our ability to know exactly what they are and where they came from. And biorepositories need to be secure, and that's from a biosecurity sense, but also in terms of the infrastructure and the physical location, and then the financial support, of course. And then that leads to, biorepositories need to be long-term, because we want them to be resources for now, but then also into the future. And so if we can work towards achieving these different characteristics for biobanking, then we're moving beyond just having small biobanks of samples scattered around the place, and now we're actually starting to build biorepositories. And so by helping to guide biorepository development and creating a global network, we can start to maximize the potential value of these different sample types. For example, by having tissue and DNA samples that are linked to cryopreserved samples or to ex situ aquarium corals that can help guide how we produce new corals for restoration. And if we have high quality standardized biorepositories, then they become a resource that can be used to support research and reproduction to build reef resilience. And if we integrate those biorepositories into the sorts of large-scale restoration programs that we've been hearing about this week, then biorepositories can also help to support the large-scale production of thermally tolerant corals, which was what will be required to protect and rehabilitate reefs at scale in the future. And so biobanking and biorepositories are really additive. They're tools that can be used as part of a multi-pronged approach. But we need to start now and start developing biorepositories alongside all of the restoration activities that are happening out there now. And so by securing these samples now, we can also help to mitigate the loss of species and populations that could be happening and provide potential sources of biodiversity in the future. Which of course will be essential if we're going to try and protect reefs more broadly and help to support the millions of people around the world who depend on them for food and for their livelihoods. So this does sound really ambitious, but we believe it is achievable and it can be done in years, not decades. But we need to move quickly so that we can be nimble and keep pace with the rapid changes in technology and with the rapid changes that are happening out on the reefs and in the oceans around the world. Because the more that we do now, while there are still healthy reefs out there, the more flexibility we will have and the more options will be available for future reef management and restoration. So now really is the time to be taking a coordinated, standardized approach to coral biobanking and creating a global network. And so the Coral Biorepository Alliance will be hosting a workshop this afternoon in Maya 1 at 3 o'clock. And we're really keen to get as much input as we can from the reef restoration community and recruit people to help try and drive this network forward. But if you can't make it to the workshop today, that's fine. We're going to be spending some time working through the SWOT analysis outcomes and the workshop outcomes and putting together a strategic plan through early to mid 2025. So please feel free to come and have a chat or get in contact with Mary or I if you have any questions or if you'd like to discuss anything further. But thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jon. Next up, our next speaker is Dr. Cedric Robillot. He's the Executive Director of the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, or RRAP. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland School of Biological Sciences. He holds a PhD in environmental toxicology from the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, and also an engineering degree from the Paris School of Physics and Chemistry. He has 20 years of experience tackling big health and environmental challenges in both the private and public sectors, from startups to large infrastructure and R&D programs. Please help me welcome Cedric.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Next time, Kara, remind me to give you a shorter bio. That sounds... Anyway, I'm very, very grateful to be invited to speak to such a beautiful community on behalf of the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. Tom and the team, I'm sure it's easier to organize a conference without staring down a Category 5 hurricane, but still it's a fantastic effort. Thank you so much. So, RRAP. So, first of all, I'd like to... Oh, I'm having the same problem. Okay. I want to acknowledge the First Nations of the land and Mayan people we're meeting on today, and as well the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef, the place where we live and work, and pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging leaders. So the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, RRAP, as we name it, has been created at the back of the 16 and 17 bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef, where we realized as a community that we needed to do more than just try and understand and observe the system, but really accelerate the space of the development of new strategy for us to be able to deal with the impact of climate change. It started in earnest as a program, as an R&D program in 2020, so we're about 4 years in, and today I'll tell you a little bit of where we got to, but mostly where we're heading. So interventions. Interventions on the Great Barrier Reef are not new. We are doing this, and we've been doing this for years, to manage water quality, direct interventions in the catchment, as well as to deal, for example, for the crown of thorns starfish. So it's a marine park that is heavily managed, and so what we're looking at is developing new solutions that we can embed into this management framework. What we realized, and Pete mentioned that on Monday, is obviously over the next century, from the second half of this century, among all these threats to coral reefs, climate change will be the biggest one for the reef. So that means that we need to continue supporting the existing interventions we have and climate change mitigation, but we need to start actively preparing for what's coming. And believe me, we've learned from everything we've seen in the community in other places in the world. We are doing reasonably well on the GBR. It's still a very resilient system. We have booms and busts. We're a bit worried about potentially shifting to a different phase for the system, but we are still doing relatively well. We want to prepare for what's coming next. I'm not going to tell you we're the largest program in the world or whatever. It doesn't matter. When you look at interventions and at coral restoration, it always comes down to a reef, a cluster of reef, a place where people live, operate, and where they're connected to their system. So even though we have to look on the Great Barrier Reef at a very large scale, we always think about this down to the intervention application on the scale of people. However, to manage a system like this, we need to think about scale in a very different way. So we need to look at this from the point of view of cost, impact, and being realistic about what can be achieved on a system that large. To tackle this challenge, all of these institutions that have been doing work on the Great Barrier Reef for years have come together to try and cross some of the barriers that are preventing some of the work we're doing, or to accelerate the adoption of the solutions we're developing. Now we're a huge collective of biologists, scientists, engineers. We've crossed the boundaries between institutions. We've made that very easy for collaboration. We've also crossed the boundaries of disciplines. We're trying to take an end-to-end approach. So something to understand about RRAP is we're not currently restoring the Great Barrier Reef. We don't have to. What we're doing is developing the solutions that will be ready to go when needed. And that's actually quite hard, because without a plan to roll them out, We have to take them all the way to being ready without being rolled out in the system. What that means for us is they need to be not just ideas, concepts, or proof of concepts, they need to be actual interventions ready to be taken up. So for that, we have engineers that look at the logistics and the rollout of these interventions, working right at the core, at the start of the interventions with the scientists developing those. So crossing boundaries, but also working with the social scientists, the risk experts, to look at how we would embed these interventions in the community. How do we do this in a way that is not only acceptable, but adds value to the communities we're working with? So in our app, you'll see interventions being developed alongside frameworks being studied, alongside engagement with the communities and the partners that will be the framework to roll this out in the future. I'm not going to go through the results of our app. You can imagine that in what is left now, 12 minutes, it's impossible. So please, I would encourage you to go on our website and talk to the people. There are many talks within the week talking through the various aspects here. So I'll just run through some of the big things here. So we've been focusing on 3 elements, really: the protection, the assisted adaptation, and the support to the natural recovery of the system. In protection, we want to protect what is there. We have a huge amount of biodiversity still on the Great Barrier Reef, and we want to protect that. To do that, we've been looking at technologies to cool and shade the system, massive experiments, coordinating planes. I couldn't believe we had to buy a plane, but anyway, coordinating planes with vessels, with experiments in the water, to be able to understand how we can start modifying the properties of a cloud to reduce the light in the system. And that goes from the very, very small to designing new nozzles that are more efficient for this technology of spraying aerosols, all the way to this satellite data and plane connection to be able to look at the performance. We've been looking at continuing to develop and make more efficient and make more scalable some of the technologies we've used around the spawn slick collection and the larval reseeding. Technologies that many people know, and we're very lucky in the GBR that we can still harvest all these slicks and do all this reseeding work. But now we're doing it more effectively, more systematically within the communities that are living on the reef. And there's more and more examples of this, which is a very nice way to look at this scalable strategy here. But we're also doing the work to understand how we can make that more efficient. So where do these larvae go? How does it work with the hydrodynamic? What do we learn about the place they like to settle or not? And can we optimize that? We've been doing an amazing amount of work in the conservation aquaculture, and there have been a few talks, but here it's really about automating the processes of sexual reproduction and taking the numbers to a whole new level. Every number you're going to hear within this presentation, when we say a coral, we mean a coral that has reached 1 year of age in the system. We're very aware of early stage mortality, so we're talking about one coral having reached 1 year of age. So we produce these baby corals across now 10 species in the autospawner and more than 20 to 40 species in the system. We have quality control, automation, AI to be able to look at where they develop, how they're settling, and then embedding those into devices that we can release in the system without the use of divers. And the reason for that is the numbers we need to reach, again, of corals reaching 1 year of age, is in the 10 to hundreds of millions per year when we start in earnest talking about assisted adaptation in the system for the Great Barrier Reef. To do that, you need a price point and a technology that allows you to do that. So price point for us is sub-$1 for a coral that reached 1 year of age. Then you're in the range of the type of money that is being spent on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia every year. Of course, it's great to put corals out there, but what type of corals? So I was really, really pleased to see the amount of work on thermal tolerance. This is the key for us. We all know that, but it's much harder to do in practice. So we're spending a lot of effort on the thermal tolerance, and we will double down on that. And that goes from all the work you've heard about selective breeding and thinking around identifying the right corals, but also how can we can manipulate the symbiont to improve the chances of the corals there. And for the first time this year on the Great Barrier Reef, we've been in the field growing corals where we substituted the symbiont with an artificially evolved symbiont, and we got a bleaching event on top of that. So we could measure in real world, in real life, how these corals performed, and they performed much better. Both the adult and the juveniles with the new symbiont performed very well without losing fitness. So for us, that's really encouraging, and we're increasing that massively in the next few years. Cryopreservation, you've heard Jon talking here. For us, it's important, yes, in preserving biodiversity, but it's really important to think of how we can get away from that cycle of aquaculture where we rely on the spawning timing. If we can preserve larvae and restart these designer cultures whenever we need to, we can really change the way we produce coral all over the year, and how we also manipulate the different species to be able to start these production lines. So that's very important for us. We've done some work around rubble stabilization, fantastic work around understanding the mechanisms and the risk, and we've also been able to design guidelines to respond to various events on the reef and stabilize these systems when the structures have been, I guess, broken beyond the capacity of the system to naturally recover. So that's work that's very practical, that's being used in the marine park, and I'm sure there have been conversations about that during the week. Beyond the interventions themselves, we spent a lot of time and effort over the last 4 years. We spent a lot of money trying to bring people together around some very specific targets around monitoring and observations and research. So we have some integrated reference sites where we've been able to develop advanced monitoring techniques, but also understand much better the drivers of bleaching and the drivers of recovery in the system. And we are able as well to use that information to look at whether we can connect this with biodiversity accounting frameworks, which might allow us to fund these interventions in a different way in the future. But I cannot stress enough how important these integrated reference sites are. It's a very efficient way to do research, but it's a great way also to gather information to guide our decision in the future. We also have made major advances in modeling, and Pete will talk in a minute about, in a little bit about the way we use this to, of course, not only look at where the reef is heading in the future, but also how our interventions might make a difference. And we do that at various scales. Again, we go from within a reef to a reef cluster, to a region, to the whole of system. And that's very important for us, but that helps us build the business case and guide the decision we make in the future about the design of the interventions and how we will logistically deploy those. Now, none of that will happen without the partnerships. We've learned so much. If there's something we've learned over the last 4 years, is that scale up doesn't mean taking that away from the people. We need to bring these solutions back to a size that is human. And we've been working in partnerships with First Nations peoples and the communities and the industries to really think about the model for delivery of these interventions. How do we make our interventions fit in their communities and their business models, not the other way around? And we've learned so much, and at the moment we are really turning our attention to formalizing these partnerships and these business models to prepare the ground for when we have to roll out these interventions. So what are we going to do now? So from November 25, we'll be in the water doing what we call pilot deployments. So I just want to put that in perspective, because a pilot deployment on the GBR means 3 reef clusters along the length of the GBR, with more than 2 to 3 million corals being deployed over the space of a few years. So that's a pilot for us. And this will be done to not only be able to, at a realistic scale, control the impact of our interventions, so have some very strong science-based analysis of the performance of these interventions, but also to start testing some of our models around intervention designs, partnerships with industries, and how we can roll this out. So for us, it's really the testing ground. The idea here is if we can prove that it works at that scale, then it's a matter of replication in the future along the side of the length of the GBR. We are also looking, and you might have heard during the week, we're looking at how we take these aquaculture systems and we take them to the field. People have to realize that the Great Barrier Reef, actually, when you go north of Cairns, it's as remote as any other community in various islands in the Pacific and other places. You need to make these technologies available in places that are not suited for large facilities. So we have AIMS, with the support from CORDAP, has developed Reef Seed, which is a containerized version of the aquaculture system from end to end that we can deploy in the field and work on the reefs where these technologies will be developed. So we will be putting more effort into this, more investment into this, including in looking at how they can be rolled out within the Pacific region. Now, what's the future for ARAP? So we're doubling down. In fact, the urgency is there. It's even more than before. So we are not getting distracted. The purpose here is to stay on mission, and we are going to continue to work on increasing the impact of interventions. We've designed the next 5 years of R&D, and it's about increasing the impact, improving the cost effectiveness and scalability of the interventions, and doubling down on building the capability for readiness for at-scale deployment. So what that means for us is we want to continue developing the methodologies to ensure per dollar that we deploy more of the right corals in the right places and ensure these survive to reproductive maturity. We also want to continue developing the assisted adaptation technologies and the cooling and shading techniques. Why it's important is because it reduces the need. It reduces the number of corals you need to deploy. If you do that effectively, you can reduce the effort that you have to put in, which is extremely important on a system of that scale. We want to continue to push that data and science integration, and that's to not only improve the intervention strategies, but also the decision support systems that allow us to achieve more benefits per dollar. You'll see me come back constantly to the word dollar, but I'm sorry, that's down to where we are now. We need to achieve more for the resources and the money we have, and we need to do that as fast as possible. Now, we will continue to build biorepository and continue to look at direct measures to mitigate the biodiversity risk. Now, Austin's talk, and we have been in conversations about how we use that latitudinal gradient on the GBR to try and preserve the corals and build some of these safe havens that will be essential for us to preserve the biodiversity. We look at Florida, we look at the Caribbean, and we understand that we're not immune, and we need to prevent the loss of biodiversity that could really affect our ability to recover in the future. And we want to spend more time to understand the socio-economic scenarios for the sustainable financing and equitable benefit sharing. We need to continue to build these long-lasting partnerships. We're really just scratching the surface of how we can work with communities to adopt these technologies and make them part of their communities and part of their daily lives. So we will continue to drive for that. If I had to leave you with a few lessons from the last 4 years, to address that challenge of pace and scale for us, it's really about collaboration, discipline integration, mission focus. We need to be focused. We need to be honest with ourselves about the things that work, the things that don't, and how we can drive together towards more impact. We need to work on the what, but we need to work on the how. It's ultimately a human-centered approach that we need to implement. It's a human endeavor, and we need to really think in this way and take our technologies from the big to the people. And we need to avoid duplication. We need to have a strong collective voice as a community to attract partnerships, attract investments. And to do that, we need to be consistent. We need to be cohesive. We need to work together. So I can't emphasize enough how much we need to have that clarity of message and standardization, potentially, of methods around the world to try and make sure we have a collective, cohesive case to put to our investors and partners. Finally, I'm done. I'd like to thank all the people that contributed to ARAP. Not only the people within ARAP, we have a fantastic team of collaborative people. I couldn't be more proud of the work we've achieved in the last 4 years, but also all the partners we have outside of ARAP, outside of the GBR, throughout the world. It's a fantastic community. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you if you have any more questions during the week. Thank you.
Thanks to Cedric, that was amazing, and thank you to RRAP for being one of our leadership sponsors that helped put on Reef Futures. Our next segment, we're going to have a panel discussion to address a topic that many of you have probably had in the back of your minds quite a lot over the course of the last year, and that is some of the criticism that our field has taken. I spoke a little bit about it in my opening remarks on Monday, and I'm welcomed now Dr. David Suggett, the Chief Scientist of KCRI, Ms. Jennifer Koss, the Director of the NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program, here to introduce a panel to really take on this topic of why the critics are really missing the mark when it comes to why reef restoration is important and why we need to double down on what we're doing, not step it back.
Thank you, Tom. I have the privilege of just kickstarting this panel session. All of you will be well aware, as Tom just mentioned, that we receive criticism. Restoration as a field, whether it's terrestrial restoration or reef restoration, has always been on the receiving end of criticism. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we welcome criticism. We're probably the first in the room to say that we need criticism to keep us steady, to keep us accountable, and to ensure that we're validating every step of the way that we are meeting meaningful outcomes for reef restoration. The main concern is really over the past few years, especially in the face of unprecedented climate change, that we have heard time and time again criticism claiming that what we do is not scalable, it is not cost effective, and it is simply a distraction from tackling climate change. Many of these criticisms are often written by those that don't engage with our community, despite the door being widely open. And unfortunately, those sounds are heard widely by the general public and propagate unfairly. Earlier this year, we had yet another example of this criticism. It was a paper entitled "Coral Reefs Deserve Evidence-Based Management, Not Heroic Interference." It was accompanied yet again by the image that many of us will have seen in the media of bleached corals hanging from a coral tree. Something that we are familiar to see, but it is perhaps the exception rather than the rule for many of you that have been working steadily in the reef restoration process. This criticism really focused in on 4 points that many of us really feel is very counter to the position that we take. The first of which was there's a lack of compelling empirical evidence of what we do. The second was that it was a distraction from the attention to deal with the underlying stresses causing reef decline. The third was an undermining of research that was addressing fundamental coral reef science. And the fourth was creating undue optimism in science and technology in how restoration can act as a tool to support reef management. All of this was yet another example of dismissing restoration before it had the opportunity to prove itself, all the whilst we're dealing with yet another case of reef destruction in response to climate change. So, what did we do? Did we sit back and did we just let it happen yet again? We contacted the editors of the journal in this case and asked for the opportunity to bring balance to the debate. Unfortunately, we were heard. We had the opportunity to galvanize the community, but we were only given about a week to do so. So we would have loved to include more of you into that narrative. We were there as the spokespeople for all of you in the room. The response was titled, "The Critical Role of Coral Reef Restoration in a Changing World." It actually started with the title of "Why Critics Miss the Mark for Reef Restoration," which is actually the title of this panel session. The intent was to lay out the arguments in response to the criticism, and really importantly, empower everyone in the room and broadly across our community with words that will be heard again in terms of addressing criticism. So I'm just quickly going to walk through the key points of that paper for those of you that have not had the opportunity to read it and digest it. And whether you agree with those points or not, of course, is up to you. These are our personal perspectives as a journey of a community. The first is we have empirical evidence. We know restoration is a long journey, but that journey, as you've heard already this morning, began years ago, decades ago. We're now starting to see the fruits of all of that labor return. We're seeing the outcomes of restoration before our eyes. It's extremely encouraging. It's an extremely exciting time for restoration. We have waited a long time to see these returns. The second, and related to the first point, is that much of the criticism fundamentally confuses what is restoration ecology with ecological restoration. You may have heard this point several times throughout the conference already, but restoration ecology is the science with which we try to fail out our practice and learn how to optimize. But quite often those failures are seen as a perception of the success or the potential success of actual ecological restoration, quite wrongly. We're not predisposed to the successes of our restoration ecology experiments, and actually, criticism quite often brings all of that together and biases the outcomes. The third point is that we're quite often judged on whether we're meeting our goals, but those goals are often confused with targets. We have both goals and targets in terms of our restoration journey. Both are critical to be able to understand whether we've met our success. However, within that framework, and this is where perhaps we can do better, is that many of our goals are implicit in our restoration journey. Within the manuscript, we actually position these as carryover outcomes, but we need to do better in making these explicit goals. We have many. Fundamentally, the social returns that we have are almost countless within the restoration framework. We have technology and innovation that we would not have really had the capacity or the thought process or the motivation to achieve if we had not begun restoration. The list goes on. Perhaps most importantly, local contexts matter. Quite often the criticism is addressed to the most well-funded and the large-scale restoration programs as not being achievable. However, this totally centralizes the argument away from local communities where most of our restoration outcomes are happening. It is ground zero for the activity. And all of that activity, if you zoom out as a network, that is at-scale activity. It conflates an argument that simply isn't there. And then finally, it's a distraction from climate change. I think everyone in the room will be the first to stand up, and I'm not asking you to stand up, to say that we have to tackle climate change in addition, front and center for our restoration program. The argument that restoration is a distraction from climate change fundamentally introduces a division that simply does not exist. Importantly, you simply have to stick your head in the water these days to realize we have to act. We don't need a new revision of a climate model to tell us our reefs are in trouble, that our reefs need help and our reefs need restoration action. All of these points validate restoration as a tool, a desperately needed management tool. I think the community speaks for itself, that we're starting to gain tangible outcomes of all of the activity and effort. But as Cedric said, we still have a long way to go. We also have to keep ourselves accountable in that journey. However, unless we bring balance to the debate, critics run the risk not only of undermining restoration, but over 2 decades of policy and management. I'll hand over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for setting the scene. I think I have a PowerPoint presentation that should be brought up. But I'll get started. What I want to do with this talk is for folks who have been in the industry as long as I have, a bit of a reminder of how coral reef conservation strategies have evolved over time when restoration became a very viable, if not critical, part of those strategies, and then to talk about some of the amazing gains that we've made at the policy level and how critiques like this could put funding in danger. And I don't think anybody can do with less funding. We only always need more. No PowerPoint? Thank you very much. So I put the title down there, A History of Coral Reef Conservation Policy, a story of and nevertheless. In NOAA, so this is a very US-centric policy piece. I'm sure a lot of you have been through the same journey in other countries. We're now on our 5th strategic plan. All of these were supposed to be multi-decadal, but we seem to be writing them every 6 or 7 years, either based on new legislation or recognition that these strategies need to have more added to them. We never get to walk away from anything in conservation. You only add more because the threats become more numerous or more intense. So for the first several strategies, restoration really fit in only to respond to ship groundings. And that's where we actually learned a lot about restoration, was through an entirely different process that was funded by getting damage assessments done and then monetary compensation through responsible parties. So a lot of really good work was done through ship groundings and stabilization of damaged areas. And then we come to our 2018 plan. That was the first time we legitimately put restoration in as a focal area. It was equal parts R&D as well as implementation at scale. So very thoughtful, very evidence-based. I took a lot of umbrage with some of your lacking scientific integrity in your restoration plans, critiques that we'd received. So a lot of other things came into the factoring.
The marine heat wave of 2023 came after our reefs had already been suffering.
Let's just talk
Yeah,
over it.
last summer was just, for those of us in the industry.
Thanks. So the reason why we put restoration is we have a major loss of structure in the Caribbean and Florida, and there's no way that we were going to recover that structure through natural reproductive integrity of those reef areas. The corals were too far apart. Their own ability to spawn and settle was severely compromised, so restoration made perfect sense to add to our strategies. And then at that point in time, we also had every one of our states and territories that have shallow water coral reefs go through a planning process so that they would have a robust coral reef strategic plan of their own that then could be used for funding opportunities. Our budget didn't go up a whole lot, but several new grant programs have come online, and because folks have built their capacity, they do have solid strategic plans that are grounded in science. They've been incredibly successful in getting funding through things like the bipartisan infrastructure law, the IRA, and some other large-scale climate initiatives. So even though the NOAA budget has stayed small over the last 5-ish years, in the United States, we've got another roughly $400 million going into restoration because of the planning, because of the strategy developments. And then we've seen some other very impressive things come about over the last few years. And when I say that this is rapid, this is crazy rapid. If you look at other fields and how they develop, it takes much longer. We know that we're under the gun to get this done. So you've seen the Australians come on board with our app. We did a reef rescue project in response to stony coral tissue loss disease that fortunately put a bunch of coral babies or coral snippets in zoos and aquariums all over the country. Because of stony coral tissue loss disease, we now have the material to do future restoration. So an unfortunate thing, but yielded good results in terms of having a living biobank to do restoration with in Florida. We also had the National Academies of Science study done that really was the blueprint for a lot of restoration that's going on now, the different types of interventions that we could do, where you would want to deploy them, what additional resources in science would be needed to be done to bring other interventions on board. And then Mission Iconic Reefs was launched in 2019, and then when the Saudis were hosts of the G20, the Coral R&D Accelerator Program was negotiated as a part of the G20, and that ultimately ended up being the formation of CORDAP, putting another $100 million of international funding into place for coral interventions. These are huge gains in terms of recognition of what coral restoration does. And then the Global Fund for Coral Reefs was founded in 2020, and then the KAUST Coral Reef Initiative in 2021, and I'm missing a lot of things, but just kind of large-scale funding and a lot of attention being brought to where restoration fits into an overall conservation strategy. And then for the United States, this was also critically important. We had a working group as part of our U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, part of our restoration working group, and we dubbed ourselves the NatNat-FRAT group, recognizing that corals are national natural infrastructure. And again, this is all evidence-based, fitting into where we learned a lot about the role of corals to protect coastlines and prevent damage in different storm scenarios. We had our own FEMA recognize that corals needed to be maintained, they needed to be protected, they needed to be mitigated for damage. And we had our first award for Puerto Rico to the tune of $38.6 million. We've been trying to get FEMA to fund coral restoration and coral maintenance for a long, long time, tried to go through Congress, tried to get the Stafford Act amended. It took Hurricane Maria and then the dedicated time of both staff in Puerto Rico who worked for their Department of Natural Resources, NOAA staff, Department of Interior staff, to really make the case that corals should be addressed as part of natural resource recovery. So the first award ever in the United States of $38.6 million, huge. I can't tell you how mind-blowing it was that we got that award. And then my partners in the Nature Conservancy, USGS, University of Santa Cruz, did a lot of hardcore work on quantifying the value of risk reduction for coral reefs. So we have those papers for each one of our states and territories. And then we did a little further work to educate people through this Coral Reef Restoration for Risk Reduction document that teaches people how to apply for incredibly complex grant programs, either in FEMA or in the Army Corps. So we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that opportunities are being brought to bear for people to apply for funding to mitigate and restore coral. And then finally, in 2023, when we were in the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force adopted a resolution, Corals as National Natural Infrastructure. And since then, actually prior to then and since then, the governments of all of those places that you can see there, the Virgin Islands, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas have made declarations within their own hazard mitigation grant programs that they recognize corals as infrastructure, and that opens up additional funding through Army Corps and through FEMA. So all of this coming together is we've made a lot of progress getting high-level recognition of the values of coral reefs and why restoration is critical. These types of critiques really put this funding and recognition at risk. We're in an age where nobody has enough money, and especially in the United States, we may be looking at defunding large parts of the federal government. So this is not something that can be perpetuated, and we need to address it. So when our panelists come up, we're going to be talking about a variety of different things. David and I have great questions, but I would just put to you, when you're thinking about conservation, it exists on a continuum. Restoration in one area doesn't look like restoration in an area, but it needs to be contextualized to where you live and the conditions that you're working in. We need to focus on changing the narrative. It's not a silver bullet. It's part of a conservation strategy. We're bridging the gap between now and whenever climate change does get figured out. We're making sure that corals persist into the future, and we're doing our damnedest to do it. I swore I wouldn't swear, but you got one. So with that, I think we can go into the panel. But thank you for listening, and I hope you bring back some key messages in how we can talk through with our colleagues, with the media, with government agencies, with large funders on why we can't fail with coral reefs.
If I could invite up to the stage Vanor Montoya-Maya, Restoration Program Manager for the Coral Restoration Foundation, Tatiana Villalobos, Marine Ecosystems Coordinator for Conservation International Costa Rica, Gaita Halpern, Co-Founder and President, Coral Vita, and Ileana Baums, Head of Marine Conservation, Helmholtz Institute for Functional Biology, University of Oldenburg.
So David and I are going to flank you and hit you with a bunch of provocative questions, we hope. Why is reef restoration viewed as not science-based? Ileana, there you are.
I think that's, is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm actually as stumped as many of you, because we have dedicated a lot of work over the years to really provide science-based evidence for restoration. But we have a huge community. Not all of us work out of government agencies or out of universities. There's a lot of people who do community-based restoration, and they have proceeded to do this sometimes unbeknownst to the rest of the world, because they felt they needed to take action. And we have to have everyone, including those communities, be able to take that action, but it is upon us. And I think this is where the CRC played a really important role, to make science available to whoever wants it to improve their restoration community-based or wherever you are. So I think we need to continue to do this, as uncomfortable as it sometimes is, as a scientist, to put very concrete answers to people's questions and not couch our work into maybes. This is upon us. We need to continue to do this.
Do we have anybody else that wants to chime in?
Gator is looking at me. I actually don't know why the criticism. On Monday on the panel, I actually said, I think we're seeing restoration, we're still seeing restoration just as a research project, because we're doing a lot of science, and we're still not applying all that science at the scale, spatial scale, and with efficiency and effectiveness that is required. So I don't have anything to add. That why is the criticism? Because the evidence of the science is there with all the publications that has increased exponentially in the last 10 years. So journals are asking now for special editions on restoration and all of that. So I think, yeah, I don't know why the criticism.
I'm going to ask Gator the next question. We mentioned earlier on about that programs have goals and targets, but quite often criticism will focus in on the targets rather than distractioning against the goals. I wonder if you could talk through that a little bit more and how that adds to the criticism.
Sure, yeah, and would like to thank you and Ileana and the rest of your colleagues that put together that paper, which I think really clarifies the nuances that are necessary to navigate this argument, and encourage everyone in the audience to read that who hasn't yet, and cite it in all your future papers. I think, unfortunately, in the world we live in, it's tough to find nuance at times, you know, with the President-elect of the U.S., you know, tweeting his policies. It's difficult to, you know, navigate the nuance in our quick reactionary world. From my perspective at Coral Vita, you know, we're trying to bring more of a commercial approach to the space of reef restoration and galvanizing that industry. And I think one thing we're able to do from that perspective, which helps with this nuance, is really clarify exactly what we're going to do in a contractual sense. And when we're doing a project, we have really clear KPIs. We're being paid X amount to produce this many corals of this species with this mortality rate, and if we don't hit that, we're not going to get paid, or we're going to have to come back and do it again. And that's helped us really keep ourselves accountable, as well as be super clear about, okay, here's the stakeholders, here's the customers, this is what we're doing, and being super upfront about that is helpful in my mind in order to clarify exactly what the goals, targets, KPIs are, and it helps make sure there's no ambiguity in that discussion.
Maybe, Tatiana, we could follow up. Quite often, as we said earlier on, some of the goals that we always have in our projects are implicit, and especially some of the social goals, and perhaps we can unpack that a little bit more from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of tricky sometimes when we put all of this together and we include the social part, right? Sometimes we are trying to understand, right? The change is happening, we are learning techniques, and at the same time, we have communities that are living and losing resources, right? So you are trying to teach them kind of alternatives. We are trying to say, you know, reef restoration, we know we can do better, but, you know, social is critical. If we care about corals, we care about the people. But at the same time, we need to make sure conservation and restoration pays people for this. So, you know, it's about creating the capacity, but making sure this pays back to them. So it's a little bit of this integral approach in which we really need to make sure that restoration programs happen all over the place.
Great. Gator, I think I'll go to you for this next question. How does scale and scalability cloud perception of restoration effectiveness?
So I think everybody in the room acknowledges that scale is incredibly critical when we're talking about an issue this huge, and Cedric's work and the rest of the folks at Ames and RRAP can show the amazing scalability that is possible in this field, in this industry, as well as all the way down to community-based projects that can scale up in a huge way. But I think the cloudiness around this criticism really comes from the perception of just looking at a global state of reefs and how the decline is happening. And from my perspective, I'll try to paint a graph quickly for you, and I don't have a slide for it, but hopefully you can visualize here. I like to think of, you could see this graph of how healthy reefs are, and we all know that we're on a very steep, sad decline. And that's the kind of scale that is scary when we're thinking about what we have to do. And we're all here to admit, and Dave just did in the prequel to this, that as Peter Mumby said on Monday, where we come off that curve and that steep decline really depends on climate change and where we're able to level out that curve. But I think this community in this room and the industry of reef restoration, I see us as a kind of wedge that we can drive into the bottom of that curve. And the work that we all have been working on and will continue to do will be critical in being able to see that global scale curve bounce back. And, the commercial industry, the amazing genetics work that Ileana does with her colleagues, the social community work, the amazing leadership that the CRF and Fanor and his group have done to create this industry are all layers of this wedge. And the thicker we can make the wedge and the deeper we can drive it into this decline of coral reefs will make a huge difference in a giant scalable way in the long run, no matter where we're able to end on this global threat of climate change. And so I just hope that we can make that wedge as thick as possible and drive it as deep into that curve as we can, and appreciate all the work everyone here is doing to do that.
I do have a follow-up for that. As a practitioner, I do think we need to, there is value on that criticism, on the level of scalability. Because everything that we've seen this week, that we saw today, is not scalable and applicable everywhere, or it will be effective. We need to acknowledge that, right? I cannot ask in Kenya to use a drone when the water quality will not be good for the camera to take the photos, right? So it's not there, it will not be effective. And that not be even the purpose of the intervention there. They have a different need for that, right? So I think we need to be clear that all the methods that the restoration ecology has put forward as available to us are site-specific, community-specific, and goal-specific. And that means that some will be effective in one location and not in another one. Some will be scalable, and in some locations and not in other ones. And something that Jennifer mentioned, or David, I don't remember, is the scalability is not necessarily in something larger, but maybe that is small, effective, but is repetitive, across the globe. That's maybe when we're reaching, and that's how reefs are actually developed in a patchy form. Small patch. As they grow, they fuse, and they can form that barrier reef that we all love.
Always get the applause, right? So actually that sets up the next question well, and I'm going to address this to Ileana, is the recent criticism has really centralized the debate, the attention onto the larger well-funded projects, at the sort of overshadowing the smaller scale community-led programs. How do we overturn that narrative, do you think?
I'm not actually sure how we can do this well, right? I think the fundamental knowledge we've gained, I think, especially in the last 2 years, is that even in places where we have well-funded and well-organized restoration goals and strategic plans and resources available, things happen that can really change where we are on this really journey from a healthy reef to in this it was called an extinction vortex, a journey that we found ourselves in. And so this approach of having to really change on the fly and adapt to changing conditions as they become more and more unpredictable is going to be critical. And for that, we need a combination of approaches, both from small scale to large scale. And we have to keep being nimble, and we cannot hide the fact that some of those corals did indeed die. I mean, it's just something we cannot hide. And I think we made this argument several times that, it's a testament to the urgency of climate change and not a testament to restoration failure.
So, as we wrap up, if we're going to change the narrative, what have you heard at Reef Futures that gives you renewed hope that we're progressing? What would you weave into a conversation? I'll start with you, Tatiana.
Well, I think the main thing is us. We believe, even with all of this, we believe in what we are doing, and that is really valuable. You have many of us, many of you, and there is science. You have this amazing community in which you can find support and you can understand better. So I can say that, I go from here saying, I care and I believe in this.
Others?
From events like this, I derive a lot of hope. And I think that hope is an underrated feeling that our community is able to harness and really capture, and is a powerful change maker in the world, and appreciate coming to events like this and the community that we have that can deliver that hope to each other and to the external world, that we can make a difference and do something important for the reefs and for the future of our oceans. So appreciate the hope.
Anyone else?
There is hope that we are, as a community of practice, we're resilient despite losing projects, corals, funding, whatnot. We're still here trying to do something, and that we have coral heroes, right, among us that are doing great things based on science, and that will continue fueling our work to transition from the restoration ecology science to the production or the industry, to now the policy. And I really love what you said, because I think this is the next step, right? Is how are we going to put this into the governments, the international bodies, whatever, so that we can accelerate all this knowledge into practice.
I do think that we have yet again learned how important our communication is in terms of how we communicate what we want to achieve with restoration. And it is so easy to criticize. How are you gonna, you just outplanted 10,000 fragments. How's that gonna save the Great Barrier Reef? Now, this is such an easy criticism to level. And so I think it is important that we start very carefully to communicate what we really want to do. It's not that we necessarily only want to outplant 10,000 fragments. We have a larger goal than that. Maybe this is also a call to the funders to make sure that when they set targets that you have to achieve, milestones that you have to achieve for your projects, that perhaps some of those bigger targets should be more important than the exact number of fragments that have been outplanted or have survived. I mean, they're important to be accountable, like you were saying, but in terms of a communication piece, that broader vision has to also be in there.
I think another important thing for our narrative is we need to be honest with our funders, with our government policymakers, that this is an ecosystem that's going to need to be maintained. Nobody thinks twice about planting new trees after a forest fire. Nobody thinks twice about pumping sand back up onto a beach after a major storm. So if the coral community is being held accountable to getting it done once imperfectly, it's irrational. And we're in it for the long haul. This isn't something that we do just once. This is our responsibility to maintain and make sure those ecosystem services stay in place.
Okay. Well said.
That brings us to time. Thank you to our panel. If everyone could give everyone a round of applause once again for their insights. Thank you very much. You got it in.
Thanks so much to our panel. We'll now go to a break. Please be back in the room at 11:30. Thank you.
Great, well done. Great job. Great job, man.